This is the moment a sheet of brass starts to take the shape of a saxophone. Handcrafted precision has been part of Henri Selmer Paris' production since 1885. But the use of Selmer saxophones by jazz legends like John Coltrane on his album A Love Supreme helped the brand reach icon status. Since then, musicians have chased the Selmer sound, making vintage and new Selmer prices skyrocket. Top-of-the-line pro-level Selmers are twice the price of the company's biggest competitors, and the most expensive ones cost over $30,000. But do Selmer saxophones actually sound any different? Or is it just reputation that makes them so expensive? The main body of a saxophone starts out as a 0.6 to 0.7 mm thick sheet of high-quality brass.
On est assez exigeant sur la constance du métal, le métal qui permet quand même à la fois des qualités acoustiques, mais aussi une capacité à façonner le métal.
Thierry Auriez has been president of Henri Selmer Paris since 2021. He says the company sources all of its raw metals from the same foundries in France and Germany to maintain quality control. 80% of the manufacturing process is done by hand, and because of that, the Selmer operation is massive. The company has about 500 employees making about 10,000 saxophones every year in its workshop, each with over 600 parts. Each brass sheet is cut with a laser cutter, pre-programmed to get the most pieces from each sheet, with as little waste as possible. These cutouts will form the four main parts of a saxophone: the neck, the body, the bow, and the bell. Selmer makes 6 types of saxophones. The 4 main pieces have different specifications for each type. After the pieces are cut and given a basic shape, the bodies and necks are bent by hand by a craftsperson called a boilermaker. The bell is also pushed through this ring made in-house from liquid tin, which gives it a more precise shape. The flare of the bell is then attached to a thin brass ring to reinforce it and hammered into place by hand. The necks are bent into their crook shape with this device. Bows and bells are typically made by pressing the sheet into a mold, creating 2 identical halves, which are then soldered together. The workers pore over every inch of the instrument, down to these mouthpieces or beaks, which are molded from a vulcanized rubber called ebonite.
Ah bah ici c'est beaucoup de temps. Ah oui, si on doit tout contrôler.
Each one must be perfect. Key parts of this production process were invented by Selmer and were adopted by the rest of the industry, giving the company a reputation for quality that goes back over a century. Take the way the tone holes are formed. Oval circles are first cut by machine into the body, and raised areas, known as chimneys, are pulled out using a method invented by Selmer in 1922. A machine grabs a circular piece of metal inside the body and creates the tiny ridge you can see here. And these elevated chimneys help keep the instrument airtight by providing secure seating for the keypads. The sealing of a saxophone is crucial to its final sound. Selmer also pioneered a more recent innovation, improving the keys on its newest model.
Les clés ont beaucoup bougé avec l'histoire du saxophone, mais même dans des subtilités dans l'ergonomie. On a lancé un saxophone il y a 2 ans qui s'appelle le Suprême, où on a revu absolument toute l'ergonomie des clés. Chaque clé a été redessinée pour s'adapter parfaitement au jeu des musiciens. Donc il y a constamment des améliorations.
The company spent 12 years designing the Supreme, Named after Coltrane's album, working with dozens of saxophonists around the world. Selmer spent so much time on the keys because it's the most important factor in how the sax feels to the musician.
Parce que l'instrument va finir par faire quasiment partie de leur corps. Ça doit être quelque chose qui puisse répondre parfaitement à l'image qu'ils se font de leur propre son, de leur propre expérience musicale.
That's why quality control for the keys, particularly during final assembly, is a top priority.
Des fois, on peut avoir des actions du travail des clés qui fait qu'elles vont se dévisser. Et si on ne prête pas attention, elles vont continuer de tourner, puis des fois, elles peuvent partir.
Another way they test for quality is by placing a small light inside the body. This reveals any leaks or gaps that might have formed around the tone holes, which could affect the sound.
Pour moi, vraiment, ce qui était le plus difficile et ce que je redoutais, c'était vraiment un bon bouchage. Parce que si on n'a pas un bon bouchage dès le début, après, derrière, pour régler l'instrument, c'est vraiment très très difficile.
Pour le commun des mortels, vous mettez les deux saxophones l'un à côté de l'autre, vous ne verrez pas forcément les différences, mais acoustiquement, d'un point de vue utilisation, d'un point de vue ergonomie, il y a des différences.
The Selmer sound has been immortalized by jazz titans. The golden age of saxophones was between the 1920s, when Selmer introduced its first model, and the 1950s, when it launched its most famous one, the Mark VI. It's this saxophone that John Coltrane used to record one of his most famous albums, A Love Supreme. Many modern saxophonists are chasing this vintage sound, which is why they will often pay a premium for a Selmer from this era. Coltrane's soprano Mark VI sold for $70,800 at an auction in 2005. But for some, it's difficult to put a price on a piece of this legacy.
So some of my favorite saxophones, the instrumentalists that made a huge influence in me, I would say definitely names like John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, Charlie Parker, some names that I hold dear to my heart. So I first heard about Selmer by hearing my heroes. I did some research and it kept appearing over and over. I see, this guy plays Selmer, this one plays Selmer.
Livio Almeida is a Grammy-nominated saxophonist from Brazil. He teaches at Brooklyn College in New York and is a Selmer ambassador. Selmer has a program called Rewind, where it buys and sells refurbished Selmers for those looking for a more vintage sound. A refurbished vintage tenor Mark VI that's silver-plated, for example, sells for about $15,000, while some newer models may only resell for about $4,000. Livio owns one of these vintage Mark VIs. He says there's something special about owning a piece of history.
And this is an ongoing discussion. What is better, vintage or modern, right? And of course, this instrument here, the Mark VI, represents an era that many instrumentalists from the golden era of jazz had played this instrument and sort of have, this type of sound in their music. This instrument here, it definitely has a mellower sound. I love the vintage horns because of this character they have. I think a little bit more than the modern ones, they have this thing, each of them has sort of a unique history, who owned this before, maybe several musicians, maybe a great professional musician played this for 30, 40 years, who knows?
Livio says no matter which of his Selmers he's playing, as a professional musician, he can hear the difference.
Really, like all the Selmers I play, they have a sound, an identity that is very clear from Selmer. It has a center chord that I like, so it feels like it has a lot of meat in it. And it has a certain malleability, that I can sort of, play around with it and manipulate as I please. And it's also a broad sound. It has a lot of possibilities with, like a good distribution of mid and high and low frequencies in it.
Livio owns 3 Selmers, and his tenor supreme is priced at about $12,000. But these instruments can get much more expensive, especially when you start adding on luxury finishing touches.
Imaginez qu'on lance une nouvelle couleur de vernis, une nouvelle finition de vernis. Il va de soi que c'est un choix esthétique, mais ce choix, on va le valider acoustiquement.
A saxophone goes through multiple stages of polishing, both by machine and by hand, to bring out the luster of the brass.
Ensuite, il y a toutes les opérations bufflage puis de polissage, ce qui fait qu'à la fin, c'est presque magique. C'est-à-dire vous avez le corps d'un saxophone et vous avez le sentiment qu'il a été fait en une seule pièce.
A special finish, while adding to the aesthetic, can affect the instrument's tone and price. For example, a tenor supreme can reach about $30,000 with a gold-plated finish. Selmer has also been engraving its instruments with signature designs since the beginning.
La gravure, historiquement, est plutôt autour de thèmes floraux qui sont développés dans les années 30 et 40, qu'on a tendance à respecter mais à moderniser.
But the final step in making a saxophone, and one of the most important, is to check the sound. And the best way to do this is by playing it.
Et une fois que cet instrument est fini, on va le faire certifier par un musicien professionnel, avec souvent un dialogue avec le finisseur, pour aboutir à un instrument irréprochable.
A playtester, like Mattia Tomat, will make sure everything feels and sounds perfect by playing each assembled saxophone.
Au niveau des bruits, il n'y a pas de bruits bizarres.
Selmer requires its playtesters to be high-level musicians, like its customers. Mattia is currently studying for his masters at the Conservatoire de Versailles. If something sounds off, he will go back and inform the final assembler, who will check for any leaks or flaws in key assembly.
Même dans les mêmes modèles, il y a quelque chose qui se change parce que c'est un instrument artisanal, c'est normal qu'il y a des petites choses qui changent, mais ça c'est la beauté de la variété dans la musique.
Once a saxophone passes the test, it's packed up and shipped to customers around the world. Ultimately, Thierry says Selmer's instruments are only as good as the musicians who play them.
On travaille énormément et tout le temps avec des musiciens, puisqu'encore une fois, nous, entre guillemets, on ne fabrique que des outils. Alors on essaie de faire en sorte que ces outils soient les meilleurs du monde, mais celui qui va utiliser l'outil pour réaliser une œuvre, c'est le musicien. Les musiciens, c'est quand même l'âme de Selmer.